The 2024 defense is officially the worst in Carolina Panthers franchise history. So does that mean Ejiro Evero should be fired, or is it a little bit more nuanced than that? I'll give you the case for and against Ejiro Evero staying in Carolina right here on Locked On Panthers.
You are Locked On Panthers, your daily Carolina Panthers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of the Locked On Panthers podcast, the part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, as always, Julian Council, talking Carolina Panthers with you every Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. Your team every day. That's our motto here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Thanks for watching the show here on YouTube and listening wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. Be sure to follow me, Julian Council, on Twitter at Julian Council, because tomorrow on Wednesday is the final weekly Wednesday mailbag of the season. And then starting next week, it's going to be the weekly Friday mailbag all throughout the offseason. All you got to do is either at me or DM me over on Twitter at Julian Council to get your questions in for tomorrow's weekly Wednesday mailbag, and then every weekly Friday mailbag and moving forward throughout the offseason here on Locked On Panthers. And let's get into it today. The big topic here in Carolina after the Panthers have given up a historic 496 points this season is whether defensive coordinator Ejiro Evero will be fired after this season. And on today's show, we talked about this a lot this season. Speaking of the mailbag, it seems like every single week I get a question about Ejiro Evero and whether he should be here in Carolina. Is he the problem? Is it the players? Is it the injuries? All of the above. On today's show, I'm going to answer that. I'm going to give you the case for Ejiro Evero staying in Carolina and the case against Ejiro Evero staying in Carolina. And I'm going to tell you just right now, the case against, it's really only 1 point, and that's the results. Well, let's talk about the case for Ejiro Evero staying in Carolina. Point number one for me is the injuries that the Panthers have suffered on the defensive side of the ball, not just in 2024, but also last season in 2023, his first year here in Carolina as the DC. Looking at 2023 and at 2024, back in 2023, Shaq Thompson missed 15 games, broke his leg Monday Night Football against the Saints in week 2, was done for the rest of the year. J.C. Horn missed 11 games, which up until that point in time had not been a surprise, as he had missed a lot of games the first 2 years here in Carolina, but missed 11 games last year. Marquise Haynes, who was expected to be a key contributor at that edge spot opposite of Brian Burns. Remember, they brought in Justin Houston late on in training camp as he had a relationship with Frank Reich dating back to Reich's time and their time together in Indianapolis with the Colts. But Marquise Haynes was still expected to be that third edge rusher, but he had a back injury and was never the same that he was the year prior, where he had a career year and was not able to play at that level and really help out Carolina. He missed the first 9 games of the season. Then he was stretchered off in his hometown against Jacksonville in week 17 in that embarrassing loss where, remember, the owner, David Tepper, tossed a drink on a Jacksonville Jaguars fan while up in his box. Yetur Gross-Matos missed 5 games last year. He was another key edge rusher for the Panthers a year ago. Jeremy Chinn, who was pretty much phased out of the defense a year ago, even though we were told right when Ejiro Evero came in that he wanted to put Jeremy Chinn in a playmaking position. We had seen Chinn make plenty of plays. His rookie year should have, in my opinion, been the defensive rookie of the year, but he was not drafted second overall like Chase Young, so the voters leaned that way instead of looking at Jeremy Chinn, the second-round pick out of Southern Illinois. Then the second year, he was also fantastic. Only 2 other Panthers in their first 2 seasons with the franchise have had 100 tackles in those seasons. Luke Kuechly, who's a Hall of Fame finalist and should be a first ballot Hall of Famer, and John Beeson. Jeremy Chinn's right up there with him. He missed 5 games last year. CJ Henderson, who was a liability, yes, but still the third corner, missed 5 games. Von Bell missed 4. Xavier Woods missed 3 games. Overall, 58 combined missed games for starters / key contributors for the Carolina Panthers a year ago. Only Frankie Louvu, Derek Brown, and Shai Tuttle were able to play all 17 games on the defense. Obviously, Derek Brown was a Pro Bowler, outstanding last year. Frankie, again, was great. Shai less so. So those guys were able to play while the rest of them missed a lot of time. Looking at this season in 2024, Derek Brown has missed 16 games. Tore his meniscus in week 1. It swelled up on him. He didn't think he was going to have that serious of a knee injury. We find out he's done for the year. So right there goes the face of your franchise, as he was just paid a handsome sum this past offseason, making one of the top 5 paid defensive tackles in the NFL. And he certainly has played at that level. You only got him for 1 game. Shaq Thompson tears his Achilles, likely done in Carolina permanently. He only played 13 games this season. DJ Wonnum, who, much like Marquise Haynes a year ago, was expected to be a key contributor at that edge rusher spot. He had issues with the quad, but then he had blood clots that kept him out all the way up until the Panthers went to Munich, where he made his debut. And what a debut it was on that afternoon in Germany. He missed 9 games this season. Dane Jackson, who hurt his hamstring, was expected to compete to be that starter opposite of J.C. Horn at that corner spot. He was out in the preseason. He missed 8 games so far this season and also has been a liability. Jordan Fuller, he's missed 6 games of a hamstring of his own. Josie Jewell, he's now missed 4 games, just missed Sunday. We'll see if he's available to play on Sunday. If not, that'll be 5 missed games for Josie Jewell, who came in to be the primary replacement of Frankie Louvu. Trevin Wallace, who had to replace Shaq Thompson when Shaq went down, he's now missed 4 games. He's going to miss 4 games with the shoulder injury. Jadeveon Clowney's missed 3 games this season. Shai Tuttle's missed 2. A'Shawn Robinson's missed 1. And J.C. Horn has missed 1. And looking at it with the projected totals of how many games guys are going to eventually miss, 67 missed games for starters / key contributors for the Carolina Panthers defensively this season. So that's significant. 58 last year, 67 this year in counting. And Mike Jackson, Xavier Woods will be the only 2 defensive starters to play in all 17 games this season, barring that they do play on Sunday on the road against Atlanta. All right, Mike's been good. He's been solid for them. Xavier has also been solid for the most part, as long as he's not headhunting and missing tackles. But that's it. Those are the 2 guys who've been able to be out there every single Sunday for you. And Clowney's been reliable, only missing 3 games, not a big deal. Tuttle has been terrible, but missing 2 games, not a big deal. Same thing with A'Shawn, JC, only missing 1. But they have 16, 13, 9, 8, 6 missed games by guys that you expected to come in and contribute. That's killer. And we talk about the run defense this season in Carolina. Derek Brown last year had a 90.0 run defense grade. Shaq Thompson back in 2022, the last time he played a full season, had a 90.3 run defense grade. You have those guys miss 16, 13 games. Of course your run defense is going to be terrible when they're your best run defenders. And speaking of that missing talent, well, look at the decline of talent overall in Carolina. This past offseason, we watched Brian Burns leave via trade. Frankie Louvu decide, no, Carolina, I don't want your money. The scheme necessarily didn't fit him as far as what Ejiro Evero wanted to do, and that can be a case against Ejiro Evero coming back, as he was a big reason why Frankie Louvu decided to not come back to Carolina after Phil Snow put him in a really productive position. And hell, Dan Quinn knows what he's doing, as we've seen, as Washington is headed to the playoffs. Dante Jackson, he was traded away in a deal I don't think anybody was upset about at the time, and still today I don't think they should be upset about that. Jeremy Chin, he left in another kind of deal of Ejiro Evero, not necessarily utilizing him in the right spot. So that's 2 guys that went to Washington because of the utilization. Von Bell, he left. Etor Matos, he left. Deshaun Williams left, but then eventually came back to Carolina. The Panthers brought in Jadeveon Clowney, DJ Wonnum, A'Shawn Robinson, Josie Jewell, Dane Jackson, Jordan Fuller, Nick Scott as their key defensive free agents. When stacking up the guys from last year to the guys that have come in to replace them, let's start off at edge rusher. I didn't think this was going to be a good pass rush this season, and it has not been a good pass rush this season. Funnily, it's actually been a little bit better than it was a year ago. And we'll talk about that here momentarily as we go over the stats overall, the results that we've seen in the next segment. But Brian Burns, looking at PFF, is the 19th highest graded edge rusher in the NFL. Jadeveon Clowney's 46th. DJ Wonnum, who missed 9 games, is 87th. We just want to throw in DJ Johnson in there as well, who's played a lot of games. He's 154th. Didn't technically qualify, but you go to his page, they will then show every single edge rusher that's played in the NFL this year. He's 154th. So he has not been good, and that's a guy that Ejiro Evero wanted. Someone who a lot of teams had a 6th round grade on. Carolina traded up with Pittsburgh to get him in the third round because of the desperation to get an edge rusher. That was Ejiro and Scott Fitterer, but really Ejiro Evero. I talked about this when, I guess, defending Scott Fitterer. I'll put that in air quotes here on YouTube, defending Scott Fitterer in the past. Not all these picks were his. Collaborative effort, and that's what happens. So Brian Burns was 19th, Jadeveon Clowney 46th, Woonem 87th. Looking at pass rush grade, Burns is 11th, Clowney 42nd, Woonem 127th. Looking at sacks, Burns has 8, Clowney 5, Woonem 4. So those two guys combined 1 sack more than Brian Burns. Burns has 58 pressures. Remember, I've said pressures greater than sacks. That leads to turnovers. 58 for Brian, 37 for Devion, and 24 for Woonem, with obviously the noted caveat that he missed 9 games this season. And coming in here and be able to play 7 games and have 24 pressures, that is impressive. But he's been certainly more impressive than Jadeveon Clowney has been. And frankly, I told you that he is just a name, not a player. Frankie Louvu, looking at linebacker, knew that Carolina was going to be downgrading in that department, especially when it came to the pass rush, as Frankie is that Tasmanian Devil's been an outstanding player since coming into Carolina and saying, I'm here to take someone's job. And Jermaine Carter Jr., get the hell out of my way. And he did that. 32nd in the NFL as far as ranked at linebacker according to PFF. Josie Jewell, 67th ranked linebacker. Pass rush grade, that's more. Frankie's 410. And Josie's actually done a pretty good job at that as well in some of those called blitzes. But Frankie, 73.5. Josie, 59.7. Frankie has 8 sacks. That's the top among linebackers in the NFL this season. Interior linebackers, to be specific. Josie Jewell has 3. Defensive line, not really anybody to compare against from last year, but looking at this year, the guys that have been key defensive contributors on the D-line, A'Shawn Robinson, he's been their best, 79th interior defensive lineman. I do believe had he had a healthy Derek Brown, his numbers are probably better than what they've been, but he's had to be that top guy. And in the NFL, A'Shawn Robinson should never be your top interior defender. Deshaun Williams has actually improved. Last year was one of the worst rated. Now he's 83rd as someone who's been a pseudo starter. Shy Tuttle, 109th, remains terrible. Nick Thurman, 116th. LeBrian Ray, 118th. Defensive line has been god-awful. Looking at corner, Dante Jackson, mentioned earlier, don't think anybody was upset back in March about the trade. Don't think anybody should be upset here on the final day of 2024 about the trade. 112th graded corner. Mike Jackson is 39th, and that's somehow ahead of JC Horn, rather, who's at 57th. So again, PFF, use it as a tool. It's not the gospel when JC Horn, clearly one of the top 10 corners in the NFL, is graded as the 57th best here in 2024. And Dane Jackson, who did not qualify but was brought in to be that number 2 corner, is ranked 213th out of 219 corners, which is why Shaw Smith-Wade, the rookie out of Washington State, took over his job before IR. And then finally at safety, Jeremy Chin, ranked 40th. Nick Scott, 80th after being dead last a year ago. Jordan Fuller also does not qualify because of the amount of snaps he's missed, but 137th out of 166. So you can see right there, the drop-off in talent has been significant. But another case for him to come back is Dave Canales stood by his man. Dave Canales talked about when he retained Ejiro Evero, how it was difficult for him last year when he went up against the Carolina Panthers, going up against that scheme, and how he really wanted to bring him back. And understanding that he's one of the more respected DCs in the NFL, and he's continuously said he likes the scheme. He's more so put it on the players. Let's go back to post-week 13 against the Bucs in an overtime loss. Dave stood up to the podium on Monday and talked about the run defense and what the issue's been. And he said this, saying, when you talk about the run game, it's the full group because everyone has a responsibility and a fit, and it works all the way across the board. I think that when you trust that everyone is doing their job and is in their gap, then you don't have to jump on yours. Stay in your gap, own your leverage. The plays will come back to you if we all work together. They're not working together. They're not simply doing their job, which then makes Ejiro Evero look bad. And then 4 and final, he'll be coveted elsewhere. He gets fired, someone else is going to want him. Maybe he won't be a DC this year, but he will be a DC again. I do believe that. And I would not be surprised, and I honestly expect he'll be a defensive coordinator in 2025 if he's no longer here in Carolina. Reportedly, the Rams, where he came from prior to being in Denver for that one season with his buddy Nathaniel Hackett as a DC, they wanted him back as their defensive coordinator. But David Tepper wouldn't let it happen. The Packers, who ended up hiring Jeff Hafley from Boston College, they wanted Ejiro Evero to be their DC. Both those teams are in the playoffs, and both those teams are significantly better than this Carolina Panthers defensive unit. Is it because of Hafley? I don't remember who the Rams DC is right now. Or is it because of the talent's better? I think it's probably because the talent's better and also injury luck as well. And then the Giants wanted to talk to him, but David Tepper put the kibosh on all of those, said, no, you cannot interview for a lateral job. And let's just not talk about him and potentially having a DC job elsewhere this past season. He could have possibly been a head coach, but he wasn't. For the second straight year, David Tepper said, no, Jero, you're not good enough to be my head coach, but you can coordinate this defense. Atlanta interviewed him. Seattle interviewed him. 3 times as many interviews as what Dave Canales received last hiring cycle as he took over the head coaching role here in Carolina. So he'll get a job elsewhere. And I do think he'll be a DC next year, whether it's in Carolina or not. Dave Canales stood by him and has constantly said, it's the scheme. It's not the scheme. It's the players. And then the decline in defensive talent. And, of course, all of the injuries, all reasons and cases for why Ejiro Evero should be back in 2025. But what about the case against Ejiro Evero? Well, I think it's pretty simple. The Carolina Panthers have allowed 496 points, the worst in franchise history. And if they give up 38 on Sunday against Atlanta for the second time this season, they will be the worst defense in the history of the National Football League. We'll go over the case against Ejiro Evero here in just a moment on Locked On Panthers. Did Rocket Money help you find any subscriptions you forgot about or that you were paying for twice? That definitely happened to me. I had a few subscriptions that I didn't even realize I was still paying for, and Rocket Money made it so easy to track them all down. It's like having a personal assistant for your finances. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps you find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps lower your bills so you can grow your savings. It brings everything together in one place, whether it's subscriptions, your spending habits, or even the goals you want to hit this year. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved a total of $500 million in canceled subscription fees, saving members up to $740 a year when using all the app's premium features. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/locked-on today. That's rocketmoney.com/locked-on, rocketmoney.com/locked-on. So I've given you the case for Ejiro Evero, and I do think that every single reason I brought up is valid. But there's also a case against him, and it's a pretty strong case against Ejiro Evero coming back. And the case is the NFL, the National Football League, is a results-oriented business. I understand injuries happen. I understand that the talent might not be up to snuff. The coach might appreciate you, and you may have other opportunities. But if you don't get the results on the field, it does not matter. And that is the case against Ejiro Evero. Not any other bullet points that we need to go over, but let's go over the stats compared to last season to this season with the Carolina Panthers defense, where they had Burns and Louvu a year ago, to now with Clowney and Jewell and co. Last season, the Carolina Panthers were 4th in total defense. This season, they are dead last. Last year, they were 6th in yards per play allowed. This season, they are dead last. Last year, they were 7th in net passing yards allowed per attempt. This year, they have the 5th worst defense when it comes to net passing yards per attempt. They were 4th least penalized defense a year ago. They are now the 9th most penalized defense here in 2024. Last year, they were 13th in yards per carry allowed, but only gave up the 10th least rushing yards. They gave it the 10th most rushing yards. This year, they are dead last in both categories. Last year, they were 14th in third down defense, which was a pretty big improvement for what the Panthers were previously. This year, they're 30th in third down defense. Last year, they allowed opponents to score on 37% of their drives, which was 22nd in the NFL. This year, they're allowing opponents to score on more than half of their drives, 50.9% to be exact. Of course, that is last in the NFL. 28th last year in red zone defense. This year, it's gotten slightly better. They're 26th. 29th last year in scoring defense. This year, well, you already know, they're last. Dead last a year ago in turnover percentage. This year, they're 26th. That has been an area of improvement, as that was an emphasis to try to get the ball out on the ground. But they were last in sacks last year with 27. This year, again, they've improved. They're 29th. With 4 more sacks at 31. Last season, they were 30th in pressure percentage, getting pressure on 17.2% of the opponent dropbacks. This year, it's 15.5, which, yes, last in the NFL. And you look at those just simple stats, as I like to call them. You look at total defense. They were 4th last year. Well, you look at the advanced metrics a year ago, they were 26 in defensive EPA. That's expected points added. And they were 25th in defensive DVOA. So the advanced metrics, as I had mentioned to you even a year ago, and given throughout the offseason, we talked about this in July, the state of the defense and looking at the defense as a whole, I had mentioned, yes, they were 4th best total defense, but they had one of the worst scoring defenses, and the advanced metrics said that the defense wasn't very good at all. Okay, well, this year, last in total defense, and the metrics say that they are 31st in defensive EPA and 31st in defensive DVOA. The only defense worse than Carolina, according to the advanced numbers, are the Jacksonville Jaguars. So you look at the numbers, they are demonstrably worse this season than they were last season in a lot of categories. And there's been improvement in certain areas, but it's been slight improvement and not enough to really change the result of games that they have had. But when it comes down to this, and this is really the only point that needs to be driven home as far as the case against Ejiro Evero, they have allowed 496 points. That is the most in the 30-season history of the Carolina Panthers franchise. Last year, they allowed 416 points. If Ejiro Evero stays or he doesn't stay, he will have overseen and coordinated 2 of the worst scoring defenses in franchise history. How does someone who does that keep their job? That's my question to you, and that's a question that the Carolina Panthers are going to have to ask themselves and answer, likely coming up on Black Monday next week. So what's the verdict? Should he be back? Should he go? I'll tell you here in just a moment on Locked on Panthers. Should he stay or should he go? I have given you the case for retaining defensive coordinator Ejiro Evero, who does have 1 more year left on his contract, so there would be a contract buyout. Not sure whether there's offset language in that deal, which means whatever deal he gets elsewhere to be a DC, the amount of money that Carolina has remaining to him would be offset by whatever that deal is. So basically the money that he's owed, he'll still get that money elsewhere. So I don't know if that's a part of the deal, but I do know he has 1 year left on his contract. So it's not like Carolina can just let him walk away. They have to let him go, or they have to keep him around. But again, y'all, I mean, 496 points. And that's the tough thing for me. I do not think that the defense has the requisite talent to be a good defense. And there are plenty of you that have had DM me that have reiterated that point. I've had people that just don't necessarily care at all. They just care about the results on the field, which certainly I think matters probably the most. I know there's some people out there that say like wins don't matter anymore, which is just an asinine thing to say. But yeah, the results matter. And your defense being this bad for 2 years in a row, that does matter here in Carolina and should matter when having this discussion that they're going to have amongst themselves, I'd imagine, about whether Ejiro Evero will be back. Whether he's back or not, like there will be significant changes, I imagine, on the Panthers defense, whether it's the players or it's the coaches. They're going to have to make changes across the board for this defense to be better in 2025. And I do not believe they're going to go from first to being a top 10 defense next season, but having JC Horn for a full season again, that would help. Derek Brown, obviously that would help as well. Getting someone who can get after the passer on a consistent basis would be awesome as well. So we'll see what they can do. So there's plenty of reasons why Ejiro Evero has not had success in Carolina that have been outside of his control, but we understand like he can't make a tackle. He's not the one blowing coverages, but the results are the results. And the jacked up thing to me when talking about all this and trying to figure out what's going to happen is that David Tepper is the reason why Ejiro Evero is still here in Carolina. Of course, Dave Canales had to decide to retain him, but you don't think David Tepper gave him a little nudge like, hey, I didn't let this guy interview in New York. I didn't let him go to the Packers. Didn't let him go to LA. 3 teams in the NFC didn't want that to happen because I want you to hire him. You don't think that David Tepper, nudge, nudge, wink, wink, didn't do that? And my understanding, people I've talked to, that this season Dave has been calmer. He has not necessarily been intertwined in the moves that have been made so far. Hence, going back to week 2, Bryce Young getting benched. That was apparently Dave Canales' decision, not David Tepper. Now, David Tepper's still to blame for every bad thing that happens to Carolina. Don't ever forget that. But apparently he's been more reserved this season, which is a good thing. Has not resulted into wins. It's certainly doubled the win total, but has not tripled the win total, which, that went out the window on Sunday, unfortunately. But the jacked up thing is David Tepper said, nah, Jero, you can't go anywhere. But also, I don't want you to be my head coach. I want you to be a DC. You're not good enough in my eyes to be a head coach for me. But you're certainly more than capable of being a DC here. I'm not going to let you go anywhere else because I respect you to the point of your DC comprehension level that I want you coordinating my defense. I just don't want you coordinating another defense. I also don't want you to be my head coach. So for him to tell him that, and then for them to trade Burns, watch Luvu walk. Now, a lot of that's on the Ejiro, of course. Same with Jeremy Chin. But to watch those guys go out the door, and they brought in the Ejiro's guys, and that's another case against them. I mean, Jordan Fuller, Nick Scott, Joseph Jewell, like, these are his guys. These are the guys that he wanted. These are the guys who fit his system. And it's not like they've come out here and played well. And we heard back in the spring, and Shaq Thompson, he was surprised by how quickly they all came together, and that the learning curve was not that significant because of the new guys that had already been in that scheme. Well, that didn't help. So there's another case against him. But understanding all of this, he was given this roster. He does not make the final decisions when it comes to personnel. That's Dan Morgan now. And this is the defense that he was given. So the fact that he was not allowed to take a better job in LA or Green Bay and had to stay here and wait to see whether he's be retained. And then a year later, after having another injury-riddled defense, worse talent, he could be fired. How effed up is that if you're Ejiro Evero, who would remain well-respected? The way I think this plays out in Carolina is that there will be a mutual parting of ways. You cannot allow a franchise record and possibly after Sunday an NFL record in points and keep your job. Maybe if it's like a Vic Fangio, maybe if it's Steve Spagnuolo, maybe it's one of those guys, they can keep their jobs. But for Ejiro Evero, who had a top 10 defense by many metrics in Denver, and then defense certainly was better looking at it with your own eyes last year than on paper, and then this year as just everything's fallen apart. I don't think he's a bad DC. I do think he's a good DC. I do think he has an opportunity to be a head coach one day, and I hope he gets it. I just have a hard time seeing how it's going to work. And what I think, what you think, what anybody says outside the building does not matter. Dave Canales is going to make the decision on his own. And if he wants to stand by his man again, then he'll stand by his man. What we think doesn't matter as far as this goes. He's got to make the decision. He should not worry about the fan sentiment when it comes to all of this. What he should be worried about, what's best for the Carolina Panthers. When you think about who's out there on the market, Robert Saleh, good buddy of Dave's. Now, I'm hearing there's going to be a pretty robust defensive coordinator market coming up here. When you look at the NFL coaching cycles, Saleh could have a better opportunity available to him. He did leave the 49ers to go be the Jets head coach. Does he want to go down here to Carolina, work with his buddy? Maybe Canales goes and finds somebody that he worked with back in the past in Seattle. You look at the offensive coaching staff, it's rife with guys from Seattle, where defensively it's been a little bit different. So we'll see what happens. I do think it'll be a mutual parting of ways. I don't think it's going to be an outright firing. I do think that they, well, at least that will be the PR statement of it. You know, when Marty Herney was fired, they said mutual parting of ways. I do truly think that this actually will be a true mutual parting of ways. If not truly, it will certainly be presented as that once a decision is likely made in the next week or so. So Ejiro Evero, will he stay? Will he go? We'll find out soon. But one thing is true. This defense has been terrible. They have been injury plagued. And quite frankly, they're not that talented. So there is the case for and against Ejiro Evero staying on as a defensive coordinator here in Carolina in 2025. And that's going to wrap up this edition of the Locked On Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, hosted by yours truly, Julian Council. Again, y'all subscribe or follow the show free on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. And be sure to follow me, Julian Council, on Twitter at Julian Council, where tomorrow, New Year's Day, I'm answering your weekly Wednesday mailbag questions, either at me or DM me to get those questions in. And in the meantime, be safe, be happy, be whole. Happy New Year. And please, seriously, be safe tonight if you're going out. And I'll talk to y'all in 2025.